sites. They call them Nike sites. And they had similar radar to us. They had the radar van and the computer, okay? And so they didn't have enough to do because Russia wasn't sending any bombers over. So the Air Force and the Army got together and found out that, oh, this airplane that just made a simulated bombing run on Bayshore could continue on, make a simulated bombing run on a Nike site in Chicago. But the problem was, the Army guys didn't know how to do it. So here again, where did they get the people to do this? From the radar stations around. And so there's some more temporary duty to go on to. We actually had one guy, and he still lives here in town, Chuck Sherping. And he probably spent more time in Chicago than he did here where he was permanently stationed.
Okay.
But again, he had to, drive to different Nike sites. He had his route he had to do. And so our outfit really got known as very, very bad for not being home a lot.
Right.
And it was hard on the families.
Yeah, I'll bet.
It was very hard on the families.
Yeah.
Because, if you're raising kids and the mom's home for 6 months out of the year,
Right.
raising the kids without a dad around, it was bad.
That's a bad challenge.
It was very,
How many kids did you have at that time?
5.
Wow.
5.
And what were their ages when you were doing all the traveling?
Upwards anywhere from preschool to probably up to the 5th or 6th grade. And
So how long did you do this traveling? You were in Joplin for a while, then where did you go?
Joplin, after I put a lot of TDY tours in from Joplin, why I got shipped to Greenville, Mississippi. And we were lucky there that there was an small Air Force base in Greenville. But again, we did not have base housing. We lived on the local economy. And that was probably the hardest tour I had because our radar equipment, our home city was Greenville, but our radar equipment was almost an hour and a half drive over into Arkansas. And then we moved it down into Louisiana, which ended up with a 2-hour one-way drive to get to work.
Wow.
And I hated that one because even though the Air Force provided transportation, they went and contracted with a fly-by-night bus outfit. I think they were Red Arrow or something. We always call them Broken Arrow. And,
They weren't too dependable.
no, they were there to pick you up, but boy, what a ride. And so, yeah, that tour there made for long days because you had the 2-hour drive to get there, 8 hours to work, 2-hour drive to get home. At least you got home, though. There wasn't too much temporary duty from that place then because we had such a bad situation of the long drives, 4 hours of driving every day just to get to work.
So they figured that was bad enough.
They figured that was bad enough. There wasn't as much temporary duty from there. Now, one thing I didn't mention about living on the local economy. Maybe I'll do it when we get to Bayshore here.
Okay,
Okay?
Okay.
Now, from Greenville, Mississippi, I was shipped up here to Bayshore. At that time, that was 1963, at that time, they had just moved this radar station from Ironwood, Michigan, to Bayshore. 1963, so I got in the beginning here at Bayshore. Time to bring up what they gave us to live on the local economy. Would you believe we received $3.42 a day to eat on?
wow.
Even at 1960 prices, that was impossible.
One person or your?
One person.
One person, okay.
I think, well, that's all I recall, single guys, definitely. I'm not sure if the married got just a little more. So, the very first thing, it was so hard. Housing wasn't all that bad, except don't come up here in the summer and look for housing.
Right.
We learned from the Coast Guard, who was here before us, that you keep track of rentals so that you have a list and get assign a person to a new person coming in and make that person responsible to look for housing for him and, you know, sort of welcome him.
Right.
Being brand new in '63 here, the Air Force, they had nothing like that set up. So we were out on our own, found a rental. That wasn't bad. We found a rental, okay, even though it was summer.
Yeah.
We lucked out. But trying to live on this 342 and the single guy, so we started out, went around to all the restaurants, got a copy of their menus, because we had to prove about that. We had to document that
the Air Force.
it's hard to live on 342 a day for meals. And so we did. We collected the data and submitted it, and they raised it up. I'm not sure how far. They called it emergency rations then. But they flip-flopped throughout the years. They'd send you back to 342, and you'd say, oh, it's impossible, you know, and then they'd up you again. So that was all part of living on the local economy. People that lived on a base, married people that got base housing, had all of this. They had the PX, cut rate prices, the food stores. The families with us here at these radar sites would all have to get together, maybe 3 or 4 of the ladies get together and make a trip either over to Wordsmith or up to Kinross in the UP, just to, you know, shop and hope to save a little bit of money.
That's amazing. You'd think they would have given you a larger stipend.
Yeah, and they had, you know, all the things like an NCO club. They had their clubs at the bases and things like that. And that's really what I missed in 18 years. I don't know, I couldn't tell you how a base operated because really we were here, right here, living on local economy, or in, like I said, Greenville or Marrakesh and Joplin and Oklahoma City.
Sounds
So-
like Marrakesh was your best spot.
It was.
You're gonna
Yeah.
go back there in a minute.
Yeah. But of course, the Vietnam War started while we were here. And now we go back to what they did in Korea. Let's see if we can take these radars, reverse things around. And we went down to, I believe it was Galveston Island, and set up a test radar down there. I can remember because, again, that was more temporary duty to go down and run these tests. And they had a live bombing range on Matagorda Island, which was farther down. And the Air Force wanted proof. The present chiefs of staffs and all the people in the Pentagon wanted proof that we could do what we say we could do. And so they ran live bombing. And after a couple of months of testing and the results, and I guess the Air Force bought it and decided to set up some radar sites in Vietnam. Of course, the equipment was improving at this time. We had better radars. We had extended range on radars. And we could go out, I believe our maximum range was 150. I know 100 was definitely, we could go out that far. But I think possibly we could have made 150. So here we go again. More temporary duty. Besides the trains, besides the Nike sites, now we had Vietnam. And those were 6-month tours. And so they started with the first one. They were on a base down near Saigon. I got in on the second one, setting up the second one, up in the Central Highlands, Pleiku. And that, I believe, was in '66, and believe me, in 1966, it was primitive living for the military. Air Force people, not for Army, not for Marines. They did this every day.
Right.
I mean, they lived in the jungle.
Right.
For us Air Force guys who weren't
Used to
acclimated to this type of fighting and stuff, why to us it was primitive to go live in a tent. But when I got to Pleiku, it was tent city. And the way you got along over there on that first tour was to go out trading. If you had, now when we arrived there, we came in with a lot of plywood because we had to join 3 vans together with a central work area, and so we had a lot of lumber. We brought a lot of lumber down with us. We ended up with a lot of lumber left over. What do we do with the lumber left over? We always had people coming by and saying, "You need that plywood?"
Yeah, I was just about to say, sounds like it was a good part.
"Do you need that plywood?" "Yeah." "Well, yeah, what do you got to trade?" So really, it was trading back and forth. I've got, they'd come by and they said, "Well, I got some nice jungle boots." "Yeah, for how many people you got?" "Well, we'll give you a couple sheets of plywood for some jungle boots or something."
What was the weather like when you were there for that 6-month duty? Were you in the monsoon season or no?
I made it in the yeah, by gosh, you're right. That was the monsoon season there because we made a mistake where our tent was. Our living quarters were on the Pleiku Air Base, but we had our radar station about 5 miles away in a South Vietnamese Army area called Two Corps headquarters. And so we had to do about a 5-mile drive off base to get there. 4th Infantry Division also was in camp south of Pleiku. So really, it wasn't like we were remote anywhere.
Yeah.
You had a lot of military around.
Okay.
And I never felt that my life was in danger anywhere, any of the time over there.
Okay.
When the mortar attacks, which occurred quite frequently during that first time, they were aiming to hit the the runway or aircraft on the runway. And their next target after that, believe it or not, was the officers' club. Why they wanted to hit the officers' club? Very simple. They're the pilots.
Yeah, yeah. But you mentioned that you had a problem with your tent.
Tent.
Yeah, during the monsoon season.
Yeah,
What
a
was
lot
that
of
problem?
mud.
Wow.
A lot of mud.
Okay.
Very little in the way of showers. It turned out that we were on a slight slope going downhill where our tent was in all this tent city. And it was up to us to build our own safe area too, sandbag dugout or sandbag bunker of some kind. And generally you got several tents that worked with each other on one. Some built big ones, some built little ones. Somebody in the outfit, our tent, decided, let's dig a hole in the ground.
Oh,
And so they worked at it. They dug a hole. They sandbagged it. We went out to some, I call them dump areas. It's where they were putting all their supplies. And we found some metal, sheet metal. It was this runway type grating that they put together to make. And we either stole or borrowed or something, a couple sheets of that, made a roof out of that. And so the monsoons came, and guess where the water came?
right in the
And
hole.
we ended up with a hole full of water.
Oh, jeez.
So you live and learn.
Yeah.
And that tour, I think that took me through Christmas. Christmas, of course, is always the hardest time of being away from home in a battle area. And even though I'd say that anybody on an air base was safe, assured of being safe their whole trip over there. I call them the ground pounders, the foot soldiers were the guys that really had a tough time. They were doing the fighting face to face with the enemy. We were sitting there and dropping bombs on targets 50, 60, 70, 80 miles away. But we did, the best thing about our job was when people would come from maybe a Green Beret camp or something, or some other camp, isolated camp that had been under attack, and we would contact fighters by radio, and or they would contact us. Somebody else sent the fighters up, and they'd come over on our frequency, and we'd get all the data as to where the target was. The coordinates, use coordinates. Okay, geographical coordinates played a big part. And we'd run these missions. And bad weather, I mean, they may be up in the clouds. It wasn't visual.
Yeah.
And we'd run these at night. Viet Cong always liked to attack at nighttime. And so a lot of our missions were at night. And we dropped them bombs and do a good job. And some of them guys that come by look us up and say, hey, thanks, guys. And
Got a sense of a real camaraderie. That
Yeah.
The two areas.
we knew then that we were doing some good.
Yeah.
We did run B-52 missions. They got, not at first, later on we started doing B-52 missions, quite a few. And although I never saw one visually, we could hear them. Sometimes you'd get one maybe 25 miles away. You could hear it. You could hear it. And
What would it sound like? Can
Oh.
you describe that sound?
The only one I ever saw visually, and we were running a C-130. That's a cargo plane, prop cargo plane, that was going to drop a big Bertha out the tail door in the by parachute, and the purpose of that was to explode it just above the ground and flatten all the trees to make a landing zone for the ground pounders. And that's the only one I visually saw that we directed that went off. Other than that, all I did was hear them. And that was the first trip.
I was gonna say, was there more?
Well, yeah, I came back in '66, and I was back over there again in 1968, back to play coup again, which I sort of like. Now living was modern. My gosh, they had barracks. They had wooden barracks.
Wow. Got rid of that tent city.
Got rid of Tent City.
A little bit of an improvement.
Yeah, and you had an NCO club built, and you had a lot of improvements.
So you were really in the military at this time?
Yeah, we had a lot of improvements. Everything was wood, no more tents, and the only problem there was the Viet Cong not only had rockets.